I'm Matt Chapman, and I'm here with Magnus Hibbert in GSK in London. Hello, Magnus.
Hey, Matt. Good to see you. Been a while.
Long while since our days in Singapore. How long ago was that, Magnus?
I know you're asking. I haven't done the maths. It's probably coming on 10, 11 years since I came back from Asia into the UK, when you and I and your team did quite a bit of work on HR talent in the region. So I know it's been great to keep in touch and good to have a chat today.
Actually, it was 10 or 11 years ago, because that was when Chapman CG started. I remember you gave probably one of the hardest searches I've ever done, actually, which was that Vietnam HR
You're going to
search.
take that. You're going to take that to your grave, aren't you?
Yes, I will. Never forgotten that. So, Magnus, you're globally leading GSK's consumer healthcare business, which is a fascinating business to be part of at this time in history.
Yeah, just to give folks a sense of scale. So we're a 10 billion pound revenue division within GSK, operating in a range of categories, sort of over-the-counter and oral healthcare. So Centrum vitamins, Sensodyne toothpaste, Panadol, paracetamol, particularly with everything that's happening at the moment with COVID, products that really matter to consumers, and actually products that matter now more than they ever have as people try and proactively manage their health. And where necessary, dealing with some of the symptoms that we're all trying to navigate through. So great to be in a business that's part of the solution. Huh?
Yeah. So as an HR organization, and we can talk about GSK, we can talk about the consumer healthcare business, but in what shape were you in coming into this year?
Yeah, I guess if you're talking about preparedness, I think like many of us, none of us could have been prepared for the turbulence and the shock to the system, really, in terms of the pace at which the COVID and the economic disruption that came with it landed. I think because we're a global business with a significant footprint in China and Asia, actually, in a kind of strange way, we had opportunity to learn from how our China business and our China HR team were managing some of the immediate impacts of COVID on the workforce, and also how they were being more agile around the business. So that as, sadly, the disruption and the health challenges started to spread around the world, that gave us a real head start. But I guess the biggest learning has been, and it's probably a statement of the obvious, is with a change and an impact of this scale, the role of the centre is to provide broad guide rails and a sense of perspective and a huge amount of empathy, but then allow the decision making and the discretion down to the lowest possible level at a market level, because this is such a localized issue, and the solutions have to be locally determined. So keep it local and do what you can to support them from the centre is probably the spirit in which we've approached it.
That's a very good point, actually. And at the same time, obviously, you've had to wire in high global connectivity for sharing and best practice and innovation.
Yes. Yeah, I take my hat off to our tech and IT team. It's interesting, for many years, like many organizations, we always bemoan our IT functions, but God bless them, they really stepped up in terms of flipping almost overnight 100,000 employees, or at least 70,000 of them who work in offices, to this kind of technology. And I think beyond the stability of networks, actually, I found the level of productivity on transactional issues has been incredibly high. I think we're all running faster than we ever have. Where I have a slight nervousness and where we're having to kind of overcompensate is where you have new starters, new joiners to teams, and how do you kind of onboard people in a way that's got a level of wraparound care when you can't all sit together over a coffee. And secondly, when it's a conversation in a group around creative things, innovation, ideation, that's just harder when we're all sat, not talking over each other with the kind of Zoom protocols. And I have an anxiety midterm about how we can make sure, if we're in for the long haul here, how do we make sure that our interactions, whilst productive, aren't entirely transactional and impersonal? And particularly when it comes to the creativity that's going to be necessary for businesses to thrive, how do we tap into that when we can't be together around a whiteboard with post-it notes doing our thing? A challenge for all of us, but one that we're particularly thoughtful around. And I'm not sure tech tools are the only answer to that.
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, that. I think the other thing that's very interesting is how we build in spontaneity and realism and sort of humanity, if you like, to our interactions when we can default to a quite a transactional way of existing, with many Zoom calls and many deliverables, which I think is also the beauty of how we start to develop a more outcome focused way to working rather than the hours.
Yes.
There is a balance, isn't there?
There is, I agree. The tyranny of the back-to-back Zoom or Teams call, which I think we're both nodding, and probably most of the listeners will be saying the same, means it's not as if someone can desk drop you and walk by and you just pick up on stuff that's either on their agenda or yours. Actually, the flip side of that, apart from us as leaders and managers just cold calling people, it's amazing how happy people are to drop off slightly dull meetings if you give them a call. But secondly, also, there's something that I think has been really powerful, even though my backdrop today is very dull. Actually, seeing people in their homes, in all the glory of our homes, making the invisible visible, I think it's been an incredible way of breaking down barriers. It's been a leveler. It kind of shoots hierarchy right the way through. People aren't in suits and ties and boardroom context. And you see people's kids and cats and dogs and all the chaos of our lives. And actually, I think that's been a brilliant counterpoint to the formality and structure of remote meetings. And I celebrate that. And I think we should encourage life in all its gory glory, because that is going to be a big difference to people feeling supported and, frankly, a degree of empathy to what they're going through.
So let's look at the talent landscape and essentially, as we're using this time in history to pipeline plan what we actually look like as companies and organizations for the future and what we're going to need. And, what starts to go through your head on that subject?
It's an interesting one. I was reflecting on this last night, actually. If we were to look back over the last 5 years, I think it's fair to say that our business and many has not anticipated major economic turbulence in the late last decade. No one would have anticipated the scale of disruption caused by COVID. So for all of our ambitions around workforce planning and the planning for strategic capabilities, I think the reality is that life has become so volatile that any really detailed guesses or bets we place around workforce planning are likely to be wrong. And therefore, if we think that kind of detailed forensic scientific approach is going to be almost inevitably flawed, then the question is, what do we do to maximize the optionality, and what do we do to try and place some educated bets? And certainly where we've gone in GSK and in my business is, rather than trying to go down the path of workforce planning in huge detail over a 3, 5, 10-year period, is to actually say, what are the handful of strategic capabilities that are going to be differentiating, that are going to help us to win versus the competition, or indeed for our patients, and say, so what are those 3 or 4? And then really double down on how we're going to build or buy those capabilities, recognizing it's anyone's guess, the exact scale of those, the timing of those, the location of them, as we have to kind of flex around what's happening to us. And I think that from a talent point of view, that placing bets on capabilities and then figuring out the build buy strategy in a volatile climate is the way forward, but complex.
Yeah. So do you see like a high competition, or at least greater competition amongst companies in your sector for talent? And is this be a good time to be looking at pipelining?
There continues to be huge competition. I mean, whilst we have a view in our consumer and GSK business around the strategic capabilities that will help us to win with what we do, many of those kind of cross over or are very close to that, which other organizations are focused on, data analytics, oncology skills, innovation skills in marketing or R&D. These are not unique to us, albeit we hope the execution of them will be stronger. So there is an incredible tightness in the market around those skills, with the costs and the kind of challenge to our employee value proposition to differentiate what we do from the competition to allow the best talent to choose to join us is key. Mm. And frankly, that's probably what we're having to do in the very short to medium term. But as we think about the mid to long term talent pipe fill, we're also thinking about some very deliberate early talent programs, systematic capability building programs internally to be able to make sure that our longer term pipeline of skills and muscle in that area is strong. And I'm not sure we're doing anything that is necessarily revolutionary in that space versus other organizations. I think the difference is about how deliberate, focused, and how much we're investing behind that, and keeping our eye and continuing to invest in that, even as we go through the kind of economic and commercial turbulence that everyone's experiencing today. And I guess we'll only know in 3 to 5 years whether or not those were the right bets, but also whether or not we've been able to build a solid pipeline internally and externally to help us to win.
Thanks. I know you've got a busy day, and I appreciate this 10 minutes with you. Thank you very much.
Hey, real pleasure to see you, Matt. Thanks very much.